Right moment might be the best time we're going to have together all afternoon. Oh, and thank you for that rather reluctant round of encouragement. I believe if you'd made any less noise, I'd be afraid I'd taken a wrong turn and ended up at a prayer meeting in a Trappist monastery. Well, you made me feel pretty good, though. Almost as good as I do when church lets out. In fact, I'm feeling so champion. There's a poem bubbling up right on the inside right now. I'm not Robbie Burns, but here it is. There's nothing so rare as a day in June and drinks on the house in the Scottish saloon. You know, one of my earliest memories was my uncle being dragged off to jail after delivering a passionate oration in favor of a working man's right to strike or to vote. In those days, all the men of the Carnegie family, fathers, grandfathers, uncles, they were all leading radicals and revolutionaries that interfered to demonstrate for their rights. These were the 1840s when workers and farmers agitated for the repeal of the laws of Parliament that were adopted to fatten the coffers of the rich and the powerful back in England. We were Scots with a predilection to fighting. But my uncle did not believe in force or violence, and from his jailhouse window urged the frenzied crowd there to rescue their leader. Remember, moral force, not physical force, must prevail. Return to your homes. And they did. The village of Dunfermline, Scotland, where I was born on a cold, wet day, November of 1835, was famous as a center of revolutionary ferment. The people there detested the British monarchy and its system by which aristocrats used the law for their own enrichment. They admired the way the young upstart American republic did things. Why can't Britain become a democratic society? My father shouted at political rallies. With freedom and equality for all. Is it any wonder then, nursed amid such surroundings, that I developed into a violent young revolutionary, whose motto, which I in turn shouted at rallies, was, "Death to privilege!" In addition to political activism, my father worked as a linen weaver. In 1835, Dunfermline was a one-industry town. Most of the looms there spun damask, a fine linen making wonderful patterns of fruits and flowers. My father was proud of his artistry, and so was my mother, whose family handcrafted shoes for generations. But the Industrial Revolution threatened my family's crafts, and soon enough the artisans of Dunfermline lost their trade at the machine. Forced to work in the new mills, their incomes dropped dramatically. Well, from the men of the Carnegie family, I inherited whatever wit, humor, and optimism I now possess. For my beloved mother, my favorite heroine, I received an iron will and intense family loyalty. Oh, she also taught me the value of a daughter. Unlike my more romantic father, she was the pragmatist who tended the family's finances and garden. If I became anything at all, I owe it to my mother's love and her will. Oh, my village was a great influence on me, boasting the ruins of a magnificent monastery, a palace where kings were born. It was a romantic town standing on high ground, overlooking the sea, with Edinburgh in view to the south, the mountain range to the north. It made me conscious of a mighty past, when Dunfermline was both political, culturally, the capital of Scotland. My schooling was in a private classroom, what you might call public school. 150 children of all ages in one room. The teacher, Mr. Martin, kept order as best he could with a leather strap. But despite that kind of discipline, I remember him as being one of the very first great men I ever knew. I pushed myself to the utmost for him, and I was branded teacher's pet. The very first penny I ever earned outside my home was from Mr. Barton for reciting a selection from the poet Robert Burns entitled, "Man was made to mourn." Interestingly, I spent most of my life trying to dispel that very notion. After the hand wheels of Dunfermline had succumbed to that giant steam-powered land-weaving factory nearby, Father's work dried up. I learned the meaning of poverty. Too proud to ask for work in the new mill, Father seemed helpless in the face of such disaster. He could not believe the era of craftsmanship was over, but it was, and our family, like so many others, suffered hunger and with it, disease and death. One of its earliest victims was my younger sister, Anne. How to survive in such a world? Oh, my mother had the answer. Go to America! And so on May 7th, 1848, we set sail, and 7 weeks later finished our journey in Pittsburgh. Yes, but Father's craft was just as dead in America as it was back home. Once again, my mother came to the rescue. She could make shoes. Eventually, Father and I found work in a cotton mill. Oh, that was a hard life. In winter, we had to rise, breakfast in the dark, reach the factory before dawn, and work till long past sundown. Those hours hung heavily on me. I took no joy in the work itself, but it gave me the feeling I was doing something for my world, our family. And then I got a most unexpected and welcome break. The telegraph had just come to Pittsburgh, and the local telegraph office needed a messenger boy. I got the job. It was 1850. I was just 14 years old. Like any Horatio Alger hero, I set out to be the best. I studiously memorized the names and locations of Pittsburgh's main streets, as well as its chief firms. I lay awake nights, fixing in my memory the names and faces of Pittsburgh's growing business community to whom I delivered messages. I learned who was making deals, at what profit and at what loss, who was seeking partners, fighting competitors, who was winning, who was losing. In short, access to telegraph messages became my school of business, which I put to good use later on. It was how I got my very first real start in life. From a dark cellar running a steam engine 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for just $2 a week. Grimed with coal dirt and without any trace of the elevating influences of life, I was suddenly lifted into paradise. Heaven, as it seemed to me, with newspapers and pencils and pens, sunlight all around me. There was scarcely a moment I couldn't learn something or find out how little I knew. I felt as though my foot was on the ladder, and I was destined to climb. Yes, but being a messenger wasn't always easy. The hours were long. I often didn't get home till well past 11 at night. There was little time for self-improvement and precious little money to buy books for improvement, but my devotion to duty, burning desire for advancement, helped me hone my craft at the telegraph instrument, sending and receiving messages, and I was quickly promoted from messenger to assistant operator. Oh, just interrupt myself here for a moment. One day, in my zeal for advancement, I rashly left the telegraph connections open during a thunderstorm. Now a bolt of lightning struck, knocked me off my stool partway across the room. After that, all the boys in the office said I walked around with something like a halo, or so it seemed to them. But as rapid as my rise was from messenger to operator, I was still eager to do better, so I perfected my skill at taking messages by ear. You know, so rare was this capability. I was said only to be the second person in the country to do it. The businessmen, upon hearing of it, they'd stop by the office simply to watch me perform. Up and up I went, more responsibility, more money. Enough for our family to put a down payment on a home. Well, as busy as I was at work, I still managed time for life's little pleasures. Skating on the river before church on Sundays, leading the formation of a debating society where I delivered long orations in defense of my side. Oh, once I remember I delivered a message to the local theater. Now, the manager let me slip up to the nosebleed section in the second balcony to watch a performance of Shakespeare's Macbeth. I was thrilled by the music of those words. I decided then and there I would read all Shakespeare's plays, memorize the best part. In fact, one passage I still remember from Macbeth. It goes like this. I have supped full with horrors, died as familiar to my once slaughterous thoughts could not once start me. Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in its petty pace. Well, I could go on, but you see, my friends and family were glad I didn't try to make a fortune as an actor. But to get my hands on Shakespeare's plays or any books for that matter, that was no easy task. There were no public libraries. But then I read one day in the newspaper, a certain Colonel James Anderson was opening his personal library of 400 volumes on Saturday afternoon to the youth of Pittsburgh, whoever wished to borrow a book for 1 week. Suddenly, the intellectual wealth of the world was open to me. I reveled in books week after week. I resolved if wealth should ever come to me, it should be used to establish free public libraries so others could have opportunities similar to the ones for which I was so indebted to that noble Colonel Anderson. In February of 1853, now with a strong seasoning in communication, I found myself on the ground floor of another great enterprise, railroading. Tom Scott, president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, had hired me as his personal secretary and telegraph operator. I was excited by the higher wages, the fact that my workday now ended at 6, not 11 p.m. And I put those extra hours to good use, too, soaking up every last scrap of knowledge I could about Pittsburgh's business world. But all my enterprise and efficiency could not prevent me from making a mistake that nearly cost me everything. I'd been sent to Altoona to pick up the company payroll. On the return trip with cash and checks pinned firmly in my coat, I received permission to ride in the locomotive to see how the engineer and firemen did their job. After several very, very rough patches, and as the train approached the station, I casually reached in my jacket to be sure that bundle was safe, and I was horrified to find it missing. My knees went weak with the realization this blunder will cost me my job with the Pennsylvania. I pleaded with the conductor. "Oh, please, sir, please. Back up slowly so I can examine every inch of ground." He kindly obliged. And as we backed over the bridge, oh, how fortunate it was to spot that bundle on a bank just inches away from that rushing water. That piece of carelessness, which would have cost me dearly, taught me never to be too harsh on an employee who makes a mistake or two. Oh, it also made me mindful of something that later would become to be called the Carnegie luck. Another time, alone in the office, I received a message that a serious accident had occurred out on the railroad line, snarling traffic east and west. I quickly sized up the situation, telegraphed instructions to all concerned over Tom Scott's initials, and order was quickly restored, and then I had misgivings. But if Scott thought my actions presumptuous and chastised me, or even worse, oh, how pleased and relieved I was to find he bragged about that exploit, as well as others of his little Scottish devil Andy, as he used to call me. As well as things were going at work, life at home was still hard. We continued to pinch pennies to meet the mortgage. Father was unable to contribute anything meaningful to the pot. So he lay down in bed for months. Finally, at age 51, he died. You know, I reflect sometimes on the time Father's and my paths crossed on a steamboat one night. I was returning from a very successful day as a young messenger, making much more money than he was, ensconced in a cozy stateroom. He had too many unsold linens. He had to sleep on the deck. I'll gladly pay for a cabin for you, Dad. No, Andrew, we cannot afford it. But I'm proud of you, son. world defeated my father. Often the mother died much too soon. I vowed from that same modern world I would seek just and generous retribution. Well, after father's death, mother and I became inseparable. She would go on to guide and support me all her life. I vowed I would never marry while she was alive. Not that I did not enjoy the company of the opposite sex. No, I led a full and active social life. Company of both men and women. I continued skating on the river, reading plays, participating in weekly choir sessions. The debating club continued, where I espoused my radical view. I was a fierce abolitionist. I supported the new Republican Party formed in opposition to slavery. I wrote a passionate anti-slavery editorial, had it published in Horace Greeley's New York Tribune. Regarding religion, I was a skeptic like my mother. I could support no church. No, I believed in American democracy and its self-correcting potential to cure the ills of capitalism and society, and so bring about reform. Oh, and speaking of capitalism, I got my very first real taste of it when, at Tom Scott's urging, I invested in railroad stock. Oh, I'll remember that first dividend check as long as I live. It was my very first real penny from capital, something I had to work for by the sweat of my brow. Oh, this is the most of all days. My next investment, made with a loan, just a few $1,000s, was in the stock of the Woodruff Sleeping Car Company. Within 2 years, that stock paid me better than, in your values, $750,000 a year in dividends. And I hadn't spent one single dollar of my own. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the magic of capitalism. In 1857, I was promoted to the vice presidency of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Tom Scott made me superintendent of the Western Division at a princely salary of, well, in your values, a little over $100,000 a year. But just as important as the money was the position itself, to be the boss, to be able to conduct the affairs of the railroads over my own initials, not Tom Scott's. Oh, that was the narcotic. In 1861, Tom Scott, now Assistant Secretary of War, summoned me to Washington to form a group of telegraphers and repairmen in support of the Union Army. Now, I was sent out in advance of the Northern troops to scout the line between Baltimore and Annapolis Junction, where I spotted a section of cable staked down by the rebels. Hopping off my handcar, I hastily released the wire as they sprung up, brushed against my cheek, leaving a minor abrasion. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to report to you that I was among the very first casualties of the Civil War. In Washington, I wrote a friend. I remember it perfectly. I am delighted by my occupation here. How gratifying it is to lie down at night and realize you are of some use in sustaining a great cause to make the path clearer for those who shall come hereafter. President Lincoln sometimes stopped by my office in the War Department, so I can tell you, pictures of him do not do him justice. By God, he was even more homely in person. But when he got excited or told a story, his intellect shone through his eyes, illuminated his cheeks to a degree that I have seldom, if ever, seen in another. I have never met anyone who could make themselves so thoroughly one with all people as Abraham Lincoln. Well, after the disastrous first battle of Bull Run was fought, men wounded and in panic streamed through Alexandria, where I was staying at the time. I helped to load those wounded onto hastily improvised hospital trains. This was my very first real taste of war, and it was so shocking and horrific it compelled me to work for world peace all my later life. Well, once again now back in the superintendent's office of the Western Division of the Pennsylvania Railroad, I began employing business tactics that were to lead to whatever success I was to have later. The rules were expand and then cut costs, then cut even more costs, then cut even more costs, and let the profits take care of themselves. Oh, by the way, did I mention anything about cutting costs? Well, without neglecting my duties with the Pennsylvania, I also decided to focus more on my personal investments, with the first being an oil field in Pennsylvania made with dividends from the Woodruff sleeping car stock. Turned out to be one of the most profitable investments I ever made. Blessed be the man who invented sleep. So many went into still other enterprises, a telegraph office, an iron forge, a bank. By the end of 1863, I was astonished to find that my personal investment income had now reached, in your values, better than $8.5 million a year. In terms of interest on principal, I was a multi-millionaire. When a friend asked me how I was doing, I couldn't contain myself. I'm rich! I am rich! I exclaimed. More investments followed. I love bridges. Felt them to be among the great testaments of our day, and as such, well, a testament to our national spirit. I formed iron bridge building companies. When I noticed not enough new rails were being produced to replace the dangerously old one, I organized a rail manufacturing company. My salary with the railroad was now just, in your values, $200,000 a year, a paltry sum compared to an $8.5 million a year investment income. Why was I willing to put forth so much time and effort for such meager reward? Well, the fact of the matter is I considered it my contribution to the war effort. But in 1865, I finally felt it was time to leave the railroads and focus on my personal affairs. I determined to make a fortune. And I saw no way of doing that, not honestly anyway, not at any salary the railroad could offer me. After I resigned, I never again went to work for a salary. I was just 30 years old. Free now from my job with the Pennsylvania. I focused on my bridge building business. I knew little bridge construction myself, but I knew how to hire the best talent, reward them with shares in my business, and judge by results. If they did well, they were given more shares. If they failed, they were fired. And in this manner, I won contract after contract after contract, including spanning the mighty Mississippi, the Missouri, the Ohio River. Oh, the choicest plum of all was for the superstructure of the Brooklyn Bridge, the engineering marvel of my day. But by now, I was motivated by more than profit. No, I was proud to think that my name would be stamped on projects this world would long admire. Well, at the end of 1867, Mother and I left Pittsburgh, and we took up residence in New York City's newest and, may I say, most luxurious hotel, the St. Nicholas. As my business has diversified, I found myself traveling to New York more and more to take care of them, so I felt it prudent to open up home and office in the financial capital of the world. In New York, I joined the 19th Century Club, where I gave occasional talks on the business, political, cultural issues of our day. One time I told that group something I'd honestly believed. No great business was ever built except along the lines of strictest integrity. A reputation for sharp dealing is anathema to great affairs. Not the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law must be the rule. The standard for commercial morality has now been set very high. Never give a sucker an even break. I'm just testing to see who's still awake out there. That last remark was coined by P.T. Barnum. I think you remember who he was, don't you? Oh, at the end of 1868, as I turned 33, I wrote a memo to myself. I've been carrying it along with me all these many years. Allow me to read you just a snippet of it, won't you? Memo to myself. Man must have an idol, but the amassing of wealth is the worst species of idolatry. No idol is more debasing than the worship of money. I should be careful to choose a life that would be most elevating in its character. To continue much longer overwhelmed by business cares and with most of my thoughts wholly on ways of making more money in the shortest time must degrade me beyond all hope of permanent recovery. I will resign business at age 35. Well, some of you may know, 35 came and went. I stayed in business another 33 years. Fact was, I enjoyed making money, having the privilege, the prestige, the power that went with it, and yet, believe it or not, I felt contempt for that very achievement. Contempt. Was I nothing but a wealthy hypocrite? Had I lied to myself in that memo? Had my family back in Dunfermline long fought for political and economic and social justice? Should this man so divided against himself long endure? Well, eventually these burning questions all flamed out of their own accord. I found the truth of my life lay somewhat shy of avarice. Much more than many of those years past, I was motivated by the sheer thrill of business itself. The greatest game of all, as I called it. I was excited to be making things that were part of our American expansionism. Intoxicated by the startling business developments of my day, and one in particular that propelled me headlong into the most lucrative chapter of my career. Steel, steel, steel. This basic material of modern industry became my all-consuming passion. I let go all other interests to focus on its production. I determined to put all my eggs in one basket and watch that basket. Yes, but to compete and win in the steel markets where the profit margins were razor thin, I had to control my costs, and my chief concern, labor costs. So I paid my employees as close to a living wage as I could, while still managing to undercut the competition. I had my workers on 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. No Christmas or Thanksgiving off. Yes, even in the summer when the temperatures in those mills could soar above 130 degrees. When the local clergy protested the breaking of the Sabbath, I warned them, you keep your noses out of my affairs or I'll fire every last worker that goes to your churches. My policies in the plants were designed to stoke the fire of competitive spirit. I pitted blast furnace against blast furnace. The winner each week having a banner hoisted on its smokestack proclaiming who were the mightiest men in all Pittsburgh. When trade unions formed seeking better working conditions, I used whatever option open to me to thwart labor's demand for higher wages. I hired fewer workers, reduced wages when necessary, replaced men with machine. I went as far as bribing the foreman of competing manufacturers into revealing their labor costs. And I adjusted mine accordingly. But these hard-nosed business tactics, they all flew in the face of my desire to be viewed as a liberal and enlightened industrialist. And my radical Scottish heritage, that would not let me forget that humane labor policy was good business practice. So I published an article in Forum, one of our national magazines, where I conceded that the workers' right to combine and form trade unions was sacred. Furthermore, I urged employers to adopt a sliding pay scale. Higher wages when prices are high and the profits large. Lower wages when prices are down. Ladies and gentlemen, this was a radical idea, and it was hailed by all labor as its Magna Carta from the King of Steel. Later, I penned what would come to be called labor's 11th commandment. Thou shalt not take thy neighbor's job. Oh, just to interrupt myself here again. I was very friendly with Mark Twain. One day, Mark and I, we were walking down Fifth Avenue in New York City. And I turned to him and I said, you know, Mark, I think it should be pleasant before I die to make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, climb Mount Sinai, read the Ten Commandments aloud. He turned, looked at me and said, Andrew, why don't you just stay home and keep them? Oh, you know, one of the great pleasures of growing rich, I did not have to be on scene to reap the reward. Like magic, my money made more money. I indulged in long absences from business, taking long vacation. safe in the certainty that I was growing richer and richer. All is well because all grows better. That was my mantra, no doubt springing from my firm belief in the theories of Darwinian evolutionism. That faith, along with my world travels, led me to conclude that the masses in all nations are usually happy. If all is not well at present, all will surely come well in time. In that faith, man finds peace. The endless progress of our race is assured now that evolution's message has shed light in the darkness. My experience with different peoples and cultures convinced me of the brotherhood of man. Yes, people were the same the world over, in their trials and sufferings, as well as their triumphs and rejoicings. People are not different. And so the heart swells and the sympathies extend, and as we embrace all humanity in our thoughts, the unity of our race is strength. Ah, yes. But these egalitarian sentiments of mine, they were quickly shattered by the bloodbath at my Homestead steel plant. In early 1892, the steel prices were booming. The union at Homestead demanded a pay raise. Away in Scotland at the time, I was unaware that Henry Frick, my managing partner, a man who did not share my sympathies, had suggested a pay cut instead. Negotiations dragged on until in June, Frick announced, "I'll deal only with the individual workers. The contract with the union will not be renewed." Frick knew the union would never accept this, so he prepared for battle. He built 3 miles of 12-foot high steel fence around that plant, cut rifle slings in and topped it with barbed wire. The workers dubbed it Fort Frick, concluded the company meant to smash the union. Then Frick proffered an ultimatum. "Settle within the week or the company will quit dealing with the union immediately." Angered, the workers staged a mock public hanging of Frick. With this as an excuse, Frick shut down the plant, locked out the workers. Then he hired secretly 350 Pinkerton guards to smash through the picket lines, take over the plants, protect the scabs. In those days, ladies and gentlemen, Pinkertons were a private army used by capitalists whenever a strike had to be broken or a union crushed. And so, at 3 o'clock on the morning of July 6, 1892, 2 barges slipped up the Monongahela River toward Homestead, carrying 350 picketed guards in full uniform. A workers' patrol spotted them a mile below the town, sounded the alarm. 10,000 men, women, and children answered the call to protect their homes and their livelihoods. The barges hit the beach at dawn. All along the river's edge, the Pinkertons spied carbines, rifles, shotguns, pistols, revolvers, clubs, stones, and workers' hammers. From the shore, someone screamed at the boats, "Turn back! Turn back or die!" But just then the gangplanks dropped. The Pinkertons started ashore, their Winchester repeater rifles at the ready. A worker threw himself on the ground to block their path. And as the Pinkertons tried to kick him out of the way, that worker drew a pistol and fired point blank. And then the hounds of hell were unleashed. For 13 hours, that gun battle raged, till finally their barges in flames. The Pinkertons were forced to surrender. Hundreds of people, children, lay dead, maimed, wounded. Enraged townspeople, they formed a gauntlet, mercilessly pummeling those Pinkertons with fists, sticks, rocks, till the sheriff's men took over. Next day, Frick told the newspaper, "This outbreak settles it once and for all. If the workers want war it shall be." Then he called on the governor, who sent in 8,000 National Guards to quell the insurgency, protect the scabs, and starve those workers into submission. News of the events at Homestead shook the outside world. Unions all over our country sent money and messages of support. Another union in Pittsburgh demanded the city return $1 million I'd given to build a library, but no matter, the strike was broken, the union was crushed. Frick had won his war, and those beleaguered workers begged for their jobs back. Frick was on hand to scoff, to gloat, spurn the majority. Of the very few he did rehire, he cut their wages 70%, put them on 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, hired labor spies to be sure they could never organize again. If a man even talked of going on strike, he was fired on the spot and his family thrown out in the street. Finally required me. Victory is complete. No union will ever threaten Homestead again. Too hastily I wired back my congratulations, but let me paraphrase Macbeth for you. When Ern had supped full well on the horrors at Homestead, I was shaken to the very core of my being. Nothing I'd ever had to face before or after in all my life wounded me as deeply. No pangs of any business wound remain, save that of Homestead. It was all so unnecessary. For my part, I was vilified by pulpit and press alike. The bitterest denouncement came by way of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I remember it perfectly. Say what you will about Frick. He was a brave man. Say what you will about Carnegie. He was a coward. And God's men hate cowards. My great sin, of course, among the staying sort of touches those events at Homestead unfolded was to give up a man like Henry Frick such a free hand in settling my labor disputes. The tragic irony was in all my obsession to control costs. The one cost that I wouldn't control, the one that cost so many so dearly, was the price paid by those poor people at Homestead. I carried that guilt with me to my grave. In 1898, at age 62, I became a father for the first time. 11 years earlier, at age 51, after Mother's death, I married Louise Whitfield, age 25. Oh my God. Our May-December romance, it had flourished for many years, first as friends, skating, riding horses in Central Park, then as, well, on again, off again, fiancés, myself unable to break that vow to my mother. Then, mercifully, finally, husband and wife. On the first morning of our honeymoon, I wrote in my diary, today, as I see the great light once more, my first word is to you, Louise. I am wholly yours now. I live in you till death, Louise. I am yours and yours alone. Well, at the end of 1898, I'd had enough of business. I'd long since been crowned King of Steel. My factories producing more of it than all of Great Britain combined, and my partners were clamoring to cash out and retire as well. But who would have the resources necessary to finance the purchase of the world's largest industrial complex? And to financier J.P. Morgan. My friend and right-hand man, Charlie Schwab, had met secretly with Morgan to discuss the possibility of a sale. Now, when the banker expressed interest, Charlie immediately met privately with my wife, Louise, to find out how to best broach that subject with me. Louise was eager to have me out of business as well, so she slyly suggested, why not play golf with him? He's always in good mood when he's engaged in this new pastime of his. But for goodness sakes, let him win. Well, as you might imagine, next day I fell head over heels into their little, let's call it sand trap. Charlie let me win easily. In the clubhouse over drinks, my high spirit, good humor, they did not go unnoticed by Schwab, and he casually mentioned his meeting with Morgan, saying the banker was just waiting, pen and check in hand for my yes. I told him I'd think it over. Next day I scribbled some numbers on a piece of paper. I gave it to Charlie to hand to Morgan. Ladies and gentlemen, the financier accepted on the spot. This was the largest business deal in the history of the world, worth in your values better than $100 billion. And it was consummated just as simply as that. Later, after I shook hands with Morgan on the transaction, he congratulated me on being the richest man on earth. I smiled, but as I left that meeting, I ruefully whispered to Charlie, Charlie, I could have gotten several $1 billion more out of that old buzzard if I'd only asked for it. He would have paid it, I know he would. Oh, you're free now from the vagaries and vicissitudes of business. With my vast fortune in hand, I focused on my 4 remaining passions: family, philanthropy, writing, and golf. My new creed was the man who dies rich dies in disgrace. At that time, someone wrote of me, this man of wealth, thus becoming newest trustee and agent for his poorest brethren, bringing to their service his superior wisdom, experience, and agility to administer, as well as a great big pile of cash. Well, if there are any lofty sentiments on how to best dispense my wealth, they would have been of small comfort to those who suffered so tragically in my factories. The brutal hours, the inhumane conditions, horrific loss of life and limb. My most fervent wish was that in wisely giving away my money, I might at least in some small measure justify what I did to get that money. There's like new libraries, thousands of them all across the English-speaking world. In doing so, I realized I was contributing mightily to the morality and the intellectual progress of our race. I ask you, was there ever a gift so popular? Did any gift ever have so great an influence on so many? Do you realize that before 1880 there was hardly a single library in these United States? My gifts made libraries as much a part of the fabric of American life as the schoolhouse. Of all my philanthropic endeavors, libraries were by far my most favorite gift. In the end, I built more than 3,000 of them, used regularly by millions and millions of people. Boys and girls now had good books, a pleasant reading environment where they could go after school or work. And it was these children, especially the immigrant children, who were the regular and frequent users of the libraries. How gratifying it was to me to think that myself, an immigrant, had a hand in helping them absorb our American culture. Librarians told me how these children relished the chance to spend an afternoon in a clean, safe, sunlit environment, not always quiet, but always warm in the colder months. And sometimes, I like to sit and picture those children in those rooms reading books that I put there. And sometimes, isn't it strange? I can see myself, a little fellow, right amongst them. And sometimes, when I'm a little vain, I say about them, I am their teacher. My books, they do their work day and night all over the world, and I take no small comfort in knowing they always will. More than 80% of my wealth went to libraries, along with some colleges and universities, institutions of technical and scientific research. I hope to enable talented young people to contribute to great social and industrial advances. I funded grants and private pensions for the teachers, the professors, the staff at these institutions. Another foundation, my Heroes Fund, rewarded the family of those brave souls who had perished trying to save or serve their fellow man. My love for music led me to donate more than 8,000 magnificent pipe organs to churches and synagogues worldwide. I endorsed everything the organ said, not the pulpit. Abolition of war, that became a mania for me. I created the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. However, in retrospect and judging by results for this last foundation, I believe my money could have been better deployed elsewhere. My benevolence was not without its critics, however. And on February 5th, 1915, in my 80th year of escaping the gallows, and as if to prove that old adage, no good deed ever goes unpunished, I was myself summoned before the United States Commission on Industrial Relations to, quote, meet the charge that my philanthropic foundations might be a menace to human liberty and the American democratic form of government. When I first took the stand, Chairman Walsh asked me, what is your occupation, Mr. Carnegie? To do as much good in the world as I can, was my reply. Mr. Carnegie, do you not believe, Mr. Walsh, I interrupted. You say, do you not believe, which implies you believe and you wish me to agree. I don't like that. Please be kind enough to say, do you believe? The audiences laughed, they laughed, and I leaned over to the reporter's table and whispered, loud laughter. That was the thing went on of public speech reporting in those days. Walsh again. Mr. Carnegie, we had no trouble keeping order here until you came. Well, I'm glad of that, said I. What an audience. Look at all the lovely ladies here. You know, I once took a trip around the world. One day I was in China sitting with the mandarins. One of the mandarins said to me, the greatest work of Christ was the elevation of women. And he was right. Although I think turning water into wine comes in a pretty close second. Don't you, Mr. Walsh? More loud laughter. Walsh was flustered, so he queried, Mr. Carnegie, do you feel it is appropriate for your foundations to publicly declare their positions? I replied, Mr. Walsh, what you say reminds me of the preacher who posted a notice saying Sunday's sermon would answer the question, why was Lazarus a beggar? Now, we all suppose that had been answered long ago. The reason was he didn't advertise. More loud laughter. Mr. Carnegie, do you believe your educational institution might be wrongfully influenced by your teachings? No, I replied. Walsh shot back. Now, Dr. Elliot says, well, I countered. Dr. Elliot ought to know he has one of my pensions. Ah, yes, but even the vituperations of my harshest critics could not discourage me from my newfound faith in that age-old truth. It is indeed more blessed to give than to receive. Many who applauded my gifts ventured to tell me they remembered me every night in their prayers, asked for me every blessing. Pray don't, said I. Any fair-minded jury sitting on my case, they take away the majority of the blessings already bestowed. I died on August 11th, 1919, in Lenox, Massachusetts. Many said my life was the embodiment of that great 19th century issue, the conflict between private interest and public good. My friends called me the world's greatest philanthropist. My foes dubbed me a robber baron, the greediest little creature God ever created. I viewed myself as a friend of the working man, yet my factories literally worked my men to death. In the 1890s, 11 million families subsisted on less than $1 a day each, while my mills were drawing down better than $800 million a year in corporate profit. I went as far as publicly defying anyone to show me paupers in America. But from my Fifth Avenue penthouse window, I could not even see Potter's Field, where just the paupers of New York were buried. My detractors damned me as ruthless. My defenders deemed me tender and compassionate. I publicly supported the workers' right to unionize, and yet I stood idly by as Frick destroyed that one at Homestead. I was a passionate advocate of pacifism and world peace, and yet my plants produced the armor plate for the warring nations of the world. I told my friend Charlie Schwab, Charlie, we're not in it for the money. Our pleasure is in performing our useful parts. That is our great reward. And I went ahead and marked up my steel better than 500% while paying my workers less than starvation wages. But for you to fully appreciate this rather Jekyll and Hyde nature of my life, it is well to remember that the child is often father of the man. So I'd like to take you on a brief but giant step back to those most early days and unfurl them to help you gain a more complete perspective. Now, my mother told a story that as an infant in my high chair, I would often beat a loud tattoo, imploring for 2 spoons so I could shovel in double portions of porridge. As a type, one of my chores was to fetch water from the well. Now, as was the custom, the evening before, the townsfolk left buckets out to hold their place in line. I was always up extremely early. I always grew exasperated, waiting for late rises. I'd often kick buckets out of the way, take my place right toward the head of the line. When my mates went off to play in a private park, I couldn't go. The owner was displeased with my family's radical views. This profoundly affected me. It forever colored my ideas on property, privilege, the freedom and equality of men. I later bought that park as well as the entire estate of that man who treated me so unjustly. I turned it into a lush and lovely public garden where all who wished to could enjoy its beauty. As a boy, I felt the shame of poverty and the bitter sting of my father's defeat and death, and I promised Mother in Pittsburgh, "Don't worry, Mother, one day we will be rich." Her reply was, "Well, what good will it do to be wealthy if the people of Dunfermline can't see us?" But I reassured her, "You'll see, Mother, one day we will ride through Dunfermline in a carriage with fine horses." And just so, in 1881, on our coach trip through Britain, Mother and I cheered wildly as we paraded right down Dunfermline's main street in a splendid coach and four, proud benefactors of our town's magnificent blue library. Most of my youth was spent with my family in one cramped room. I later bought Skiba, the most glorious castle in all of Europe. Hundreds of rooms on 50,000 acres of glorious Scottish estate. At 11, I left my homeland in poverty and humiliation, and I returned 35 years later, the richest man on the planet. This illiterate lad who had trouble finding books as a youth, I went on to write 8 books on travel, economics, biography. I hobnobbed with New York's literary and cultural elite. Mark Twain, Helen Keller, Booker T. Washington were my friends. My early travels took me to the slimy rivers and the grimy smoke, the degradation and the squalor of Pittsburgh's slums. My later travels took me to the Taj Mahal. Of that experience I wrote, "Till the day I die amid mountain streams, or midnight strolls in the forest, whenever the mood comes, when all that is most sacred, most elevated and pure, recur to shed their radiance upon the tranquil mind, there will be found among my treasures the memories of that lovely charm, the Taj Mahal." In those later travels, they finally brought me home. I wrote, "'Tis God's mercy that I was born a Scot. I could not have been content to be anything else. This plucky, dour devil, set in his ways, getting them to, level-headed and shrewd, with an eye to the main chance always, and yet so lovingly weak, so fond, so led away by song or story, so easily touched by fine issues, so true. Oh, you suit me, Scotia. Proud, proud I am that I am your son. Though my intellect favored American democracy and its freedom from inherited privilege, oh, my child's heart ever longed for the islands of my beloved Scotland. Before you then stands a man who at age 30 had a guaranteed income of better than $8.5 million a year when a bottle of milk cost less than 5 cents. I alone pioneered the concept of vertical integration, controlling the natural resources, delivery, final manufacture, distribution of my goods. Growth was my mantra. Cutting costs my obsession. I put all my eggs in one basket, and I watched that basket. On a tour of one of my factories, the man in charge of building the furnaces told me that had he known earlier what he knew then, he could have built them better, saving, imagine this now, saving 1/10 of a cent on every ton of steel. Instantly, I calculated what that meant, and on the spot I told that man, tear every single furnace down and build them right. And he said my life was a fairy tale, as if touched by magic. A frog became a prince and then a king. Well, let me assure you, it was never with pixie dust that I won my crown. It was pluck and will. And for my workers, sadly, there was never a happy ending. No. The fact of the matter is my life actually reads like a Shakespearean drama. I was a latter-day Macbeth. My vaulting ambition hardened my heart. My mother, like Lady Macbeth, she steeled my resolve to take the throne, no matter what the toll in toil, tears, blood, sweat, death. The ghost of my ancestors, much like the ghost of Hamlet's father, implored me to seek justice in my realm, but like the malevolent and ruthless Richard III, my inner demons of greed, selfishness, pride, they often got the better of me. The most noble aspect of my life, my passionate faith in the human mind and the human spirit. I ask you, had I harnessed that same human capital and created for all of you the richest, most powerful nation on earth, help create that. I had my life, along with King Lear's, been such that I could say, I am a man more sinned against than sinning. In the end, then, my life was much like your lives. Well, if you take away that little matter of $100 billion. My life was human, too human. The angels of my better nature, they'd finally lead me to truth, but not before my darkest demons drove me to treat my workers like animals, slaves to be abused and misused. And it was the condemning memories of these past sins that haunted me into giving away the bulk of my ill-gotten gain. You see, I had put all my faith in commerce, capitalism, and American democracy. And ladies and gentlemen, I left no space for God, for the spirit of love. My treasure had been where my heart was for far too long. Ladies and gentlemen, what good does it do if we gain the whole world, yet we lose our very souls? None of us are placed on this planet for our own self-aggrandizement at the expense of our fellows. In fact, it's the opposite, isn't it? We have been imbued with talents, dreams, gifts, passions, goals, not to lift ourselves up above others, but to be their blessing. With every passing breath, you and all of us and I have been charged to be our brothers and sisters' keeper. Not like myself, only when the circumstances of life make it convenient to be loving and charitable. If that isn't so, then heaven is a sham. Love, a shameless lie. For God's sake, then, for love's sake, make yourselves blessings to others. Spend freely the talents you have been given on others. Commit each day to living your life humbly. You know, humility is not thinking less of yourselves, but thinking of yourselves less, so that you can be a blessing to others more. Every day, give yourself away. Make yourself a blessing to all this earth and the creatures on it, both big and small. And when you face the final breath, you will be able to ask in humble satisfaction, "Death, where is thy sting?" And you will receive the most glorious response. "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter now into the joy and the peace of eternal love." I ask you in history to judge whether or not I was worthy of hearing those very same words. Thank you.